connect with it very differently than kids that are 16, 17. So I have like 3-4 different levels just for teens, basically, and young adults. So, and it takes time to get that kind of experience going and to fine-tune all the kind of workshops that we've got going. And I don't know if Jamie's got it, but I sent kind of a picture of one of the workshops we're doing that I also brought to Utrecht, which is called a learning board. And it's kind of pretty simple, just trying to physically put on a board the financial sector. Like this, we've just done kind of a big circle, the central bank in the middle, the banks around it, and the customers in the banks at the edge. And with this little kind of board, you can show every transaction in the economy. And that's kind of mind-blowing for kids to see, well, what happens when I move this money from one account in this bank to another account in the same bank? Well, nothing happens. And to show what happens if you move it from one bank to another, that you can use the central bank as a clearing system, or you can, like, the two banks can also handle it just by themselves. That's very important, and it's very easy for kids to connect with that. So that's kind of I use that for the kind of technical stuff. But that's also the whole emotional kind of, how do we feel about debt, and the money being debt in the same time. So I've done a Monopoly hack game, which is I've changed the rules of Monopoly. Pretty simple to try and make it look like the money is persistent. So how can your money get into this economy in the Monopoly game? Well, you need to borrow it. And if you repay your loans, it will disappear from the game. So the game will have like built into it like a robust circle. And the kids really feel like, ow, it hurts to have that debt. And that is something that the kids won't learn until it's, well, basically too late. They lost a lot of money on their first house or stocked in. So that is like two of the things that you do a lot. And of course, I like to do some commercial work for the Moneymaker game, which is quite difficult but brilliant. So there are these kind of things you need to work out. Can I use this as a workshop where I need to participate? Then the level can be pretty high. And if you want to do material for the teachers can do in a decentralized system, you want to make text to make it easy for them to teach, then it's a whole other kind of level you work. So that's kind of things we do. We also have open universities in Denmark where you do courses, and Penge has our own course at university. We also have summer camps where people come for a whole week and we teach them about the monetary system. So there are lots of options on how to get people to connect with this. Yeah, there's kind of a whole range of stuff, but of course we don't. It is because we have a very strong academic backbone. We have 3 very important researchers, and we kind of build on that. So you need to be in the news, you need to build your organization, you need to be like on top of your game academically, or else it's not going to work. And I think, well, I guess most of you are from the US, that is obviously a lot bigger country, and it's harder to like show that you are very brilliant at what you do, which is easier for a small country. But I think it's essential to show the world what you can do, and that you are, in an academic sense, what you call it, have accountability, and also, what's what I look for? Can't remember. But show, well, we're up for this.
Credibility?
Credibility, yeah, sure. So that's kind of like the first things I wanted to tell you about, but I'm up for any kind of questions, and if you want to hear more about the organization or more about the actual things we've done or any kind, I'm here for your questions. So thank you for now.
Thank you, Jonas. That's very inspiring and stimulated a lot of people's brain cells to what they can hopefully try and emulate, working off what you're doing there. So got the first speaker, Michael White from Texas.
Hi, I was just wondering the most common type of questions that you get at schools or other places.
What are the most common types of questions you get at schools or other places where you go to deliver your educational programs?
Yeah, are you talking about like the teachers or the kids? What kind of level are we talking about here?
Both.
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 Both. Yeah, the kids are kind of like, I've also told a lot of adults, and the adults are like, you must be kidding me, or you don't mean this, or I know for a fact it doesn't work like this, or so I use all of my time like convincing them that what I'm actually saying is correct. While teaching kids, they don't know what's correct. They never heard about the monetary system. They don't know how banks work. They don't know how money is created. They don't know anything. So in that sense, it's quite easy. And the questions they are answering are more like, why is it like this? Or why don't we do it in another way? Or who gave them the right to do this, the banks? So it kind of like, it's getting more philosophical or more about democracy or stuff like that when I talk to the kids.
How do you answer the question, who gave the banks the right to do this? It's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah, usually the answer is no one. They just did it, and no one stopped them. So, and that is also, is that the best way to create a new system, that it just happens and no one's really thought about it or done anything about it? And the teachers, they are, there's kind of the thing that because we are like an NGO with a purpose, so they can be more critical, saying that, yeah, this is just one perspective. So some of them are like, want me to be very broad and very critical of what I say myself, saying, well, we have a perspective and here are the other perspectives. And others are just saying, well, it's fine, you're here, just next week we have a local banker, and he will do the other perspective. So it could be different compared to what the teachers are using me for. But I'm fine with both, and I know that we have one perspective, and there are other perspectives. So I'm trying to like split it up and saying this first bit, this is how the banking sector works, and how the bankers, they would nod to this. They might not say it with the same words, but they say, yeah, that's kind of how it works. We create the money in the way Jonas is saying it. So I use usually 60–70% of my presentations on just how does the money system work, who creates the money, how do they do it, and what are the effects. And most bankers would agree to that. And then the last would be throwing up the ball, saying, well, could it be like this? Could it be like this? How could we try and stop some of those negative effects of private money creation?
Jonas, this is fellow educator Stephen. We met in Utrecht. Several little questions. How young are you working with students, and how do you approach the younger students?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, in Denmark, the older the kids get, the more money will be in the system. So secondary schools have very few money, so I'm not going there very often.
No, let me ask that again. I meant how you teach, how you teach young children versus high schools, what we would call secondary or high school students versus, say, 10-year-old students or 11-year-old students. First, that question.
Well, I never taught anyone below the age of 13, I think. 12, 13, those are the youngest. And when I teach them, I try to focus on one or two like core important things they need to learn. So that would be who creates the money. Make them understand at least that. Or sometimes I'm like the concept of inflation, and that is primarily driven by money creation. So if I can get them to understand those kind of concepts, I'm fine. I use a lot an auction, where I auction out something they would like to have. It's usually stupid small amounts of candy, but it works because they want to get it. and the kind of workshop doesn't work, they don't want to get it. So I auction out these cans, and then I introduce more and more money to the system. And then they see the prices of the auction will increase because I have put in more like fake money into the system. So they get a feeling of, oh, why did he get his candy cheaper because he bought it first? And why am I here with no candy? So they kind of get the feeling of, well, this system is rigged in some way, and those who get the access to the money first, they will not suffer the inflation, and those who get the money later on, they will suffer the inflation. So I'm trying to get it somewhat emotional, or make them connect emotional, because that's how I think they will remember what I've taught them. And then focus on a smaller area of this great and difficult subject. But you can always make it easier. It's not because I think I could go below 12. You can connect with even younger kids, certainly. But you need to really think about how much can I teach this kind of group of kids. And because I come in as some kind of external teacher, I have to like make some predefined. I don't know what I'm going into. I just know the age of the kids, and then it can be very different.
I remember in Utrecht we played the, I think it was Middle Ages game, or maybe 19th century, of how the banking system worked. And do you play with that game in Denmark? It's the board game where there's levels of development, or Moneymaker.
What's the name of the game?
Is it Moneymaker?
The Moneymaker game. Yes, I've translated it, and I have a prototype copy, so I've played it a lot, like more than a lot. But it's a difficult game. I would say it's for adults mainly or late. So
yeah, it'd be for your older students, and remember we mentioned it could be used even for the. It could be used for the bankers even.
Can you repeat the question, Jamie?
No, you got the question, Jonas. I was just asking about the money. No question yet. I was just talking in general, wondering about how that game's working. More questions here?
Yeah.
1 second.
Hi, I'm Jerry. I was wondering a couple questions. One is, how did you get your programs introduced into the school systems and accepted? And the other one is, some of the games, are they commercialized and available in English that you developed?
Okay, the first question is, how did you get access into the schools, agreement from the schools to allow you in there, I think? And we'll go with that first.
We can take one at a time. Well, in Denmark it's quite easy because it's not me contacting the schools, it's the schools contacting me. And we have what is called open schools, which is, it's decentralized. So the school can go and ask almost anyone, would you come and help us to teach, and pay for it. So it's down to the specific teacher to contact someone, and it's the principal who can say yes or no. So it's not like we have this standardized board who allows all kind of teaching materials. We're more like free-flowing. So there's a lot of different materials, and a lot of them are not used, and the teachers have a lot of freedom, and principals also have some freedom to pick and choose what they want to use.
Okay. The second question was, are these games and stuff in English? I know that Moneymaker is. I'm not sure whether your one that you do in the schools is.
Yeah, everything I do is in Danish. And some of it is translated. Most of it is in Danish because, well, I need someone to know that they're going to use it. And for now, there hasn't been much of that. But I've just posted what I call the real Monopoly game. I posted the rules on our IMMR intranet, so you can have access to that, and I think Jamie is part of that group, so that is accessible and can use it for free. But it would be 15 years plus would be the age range, and well suited for adults as well. yeah, I guess that's the answer to that question.
Any more questions? Okay, Lucille.
Yeah. Hi, really great work you're doing. I'm also an educator, and I'm an educator of future educators. And so one question I have is whether you have had other teachers come from other countries or other places in your area to learn the pedagogy that you're doing, so that it can be replicated. And secondly, just what is your own background? How did you come into this? And educationally or professionally? And are you the only one doing the workshops, or how many of you are doing the workshops? And how do you develop those workshops?
That was a lot of questions. Well, firstly, myself, I studied political science at Copenhagen University. So I have a master's degree where my master thesis is on money creation, and it's called More Money, More Problems. And I've taught like most of my life, mainly sports actually, and my parents are teachers. So that's kind of where my background plays into this. Regarding teaching other teachers, I have one in my calendar now. There's one more, I guess one more is coming, where whole schools are saying, can you come and teach it's usually social sciences teachers. We have a social sciences teacher group, I guess, of 10, 12 teachers, and they come for a workshop at our office for a whole day. To teach them about our perspectives and way of getting this into the kids' minds and perspective. So there are some teachers who are willing to learn, but I guess they're quite at high school academically interested, and somewhat actually more than the actual workshops. So it can be hard to figure out. In Gode, I am doing, I guess, 90% of the speeches and presentations, and for now 100% of the workshops and normal teachings. So yeah, right now it relies on me, but I guess if I wasn't there, there would be others capable of learning to do it fairly quickly. But it's also like a time thing, because I've taken this pretty serious, and it takes up like it's a half-time job, and a lot of the teachings I do, I need to travel 3, 4, 5 hours each way, and then teach for 5, 6 hours, so it can be quite long days. And if you have a normal job, that's impossible.
Hello,
Yes,
Jonas. I got
one more.
question.
I guess there was one more part of the question I
one more.
haven't addressed yet, but I can't remember.
She thinks you got her questions covered. So, then I'll go on.
That's good.
No? Okay, it's on. Your master's thesis there, More Money, More Problems. Is that in
Yeah.
Is it in English also? Or is it in Danish? Probably you have to make it, put it in Danish, but is it in English?
I think you're asking me whether it is in Danish or in English, the master thesis, and it's in Danish. So
We're very disappointed here. Oh, we want it in English. We like an English version. Are you planning maybe an English version of it, if it's good enough you think it is?
Colbert is offering to translate. He's offering to translate, right, Colbert?
yeah.
I can't, no, I'm Dutch, I'm not Danish. You keep mixing those countries.
I don't know.
What I probably didn't tell you is that we have written a lot of books in Denmark. So there's the one guy you should look up is probably Ole Bjerg, B-J-E-R-J, B-J-E-R-G,
Yes.
He's done a TED Talk as well. So you can, and that is of course in English, and he's on our board and one of my co-workers, full-time professor. And,
Yeah, I have that book and I read it indeed.
He has that book and he's read it.
Yes, it's very good.
Yeah, great.
One of the greatest philosophers
It's very
actually
good. And he
read it also. Slavoj
So
Žižek.
Gode wrote a couple of other books in which could be translated, and I wrote a book with 3 board member colleagues, which came out this spring. So if you want to translate stuff, that would be the books I would recommend you to translate. And they are not that long, but they are of course in Danish.
Thanks, yes, I'm not doing Danish.
Because he's not doing Danish, he does Dutch, French, German, and something else.
English.
Well, English, and kitchen Spanish.
But that's one of the hard things, like try to get what's out there translated to your own language, and it's even harder for us because very little is written in Danish. So, and a lot of books can't really collect stuff on in language. So a lot of what we do is like adapting those books already out there, or those thoughts into something even more understandable to Danes. Like our housing bubble has been mad, just like in the US, like the houses losing 50% of their value. And that is different from Germany, and the political system is different, the way our central bank work is different. So there's a lot of things you need to get into your texts, and that is important to get people to connect with what you write.
Any more questions, or do you think that's about it? Well, I think you've answered all the questions fantastically, Jonas, and thank you for being here. You know, I know it's late in the evening there, so we really appreciate it. And please give Jonas Jensen a very warm thank you. Whatever Jonas sent me, I'll have it on the AMI website. It'll be available, and same with all of the speakers' presentations. A lot of them are up there already, but some I haven't received yet. So if you want to be memorialised, please, when I ask for your stuff, please send it to me and I'll get it up on the website. Thank you. Thanks, Jonas.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
It's inspiring to see these young people. Well, that's just, I know. Right. Right. Yeah.
I have the, are we ready to get going?
Yeah.
I have the privilege of introducing Mihaly of Mihaly and Hollis. Mihaly and I are right about the same age. He's like early 50s we were born. And Mihaly was raised in Hungary during the communist era, and later in life became an English scholar, if you will. But then he had a midlife crisis and he turned over to economics and became an economic journalist, and has worked on a number of publications relative to economics and journalism. So, and I've been able to visit Hungary, and I was meeting several people, and I was trying to think about what the Soviet life experience was. And so today we have Mihaly with us. And so the first part of the presentation, and it's really meant for questions, we'll get to that rather soon. But Mihaly will talk to you a little bit about life during the communist era in Hungary. And in our system, we have a two-tier banking system. In their system, it was a one-tier banking system. There was no such thing as reserves, basically. But the big difference was it was non-competitive. And also you had Moscow having it say left and right too. But what can we learn from people in different places? And then we can think, maybe a little later we'll save some time, what happens after 1990 and what's the present experience and where might we be going into the future together. So,
Welcome.
So, and welcome, Michigan.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I plead not guilty. I've been forced to speak guilty. Okay, joking aside, so you see a few headlines, bullet points.
Hold the mic up close to your mouth.
Okay,
Thank you.
is that all right now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay,
Good.
And I elaborate on each point. Okay, I'd like to put this whole banking and monetary issue into a broader economic context, you know, for you to understand how the system worked, what it was like, because it's completely different from the system that you have grown up in, most of you, or all of you. Yeah? So, to start with, Hungary in the World War II, or at the end of World War II, emerged as a country damaged, severely damaged by the war, Second World War, and also inheriting a very backward, underdeveloped economy. It was an agricultural country, so with very little or hardly any heavy industry, hardly really any developed industry when the war came over, and the Soviet system was introduced after the war because Hungary was occupied by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Stalinist communist system was introduced into the country, which left its mark on the economy, not only on the political system, but also on the economic and social system. Just as a one-party system was introduced, the Communist Party in control, everything that was from 1947, 1948 on, practically across the board nationalization. Industry was nationalized, banks were nationalized, bigger private properties were nationalized, so everything became under state control and state ownership. And the same happened in the banking system and the monetary system. So after World War II, after 47, 48, the banking system was the following. There was the National Bank of Hungary, the central bank, and there was only one commercial bank in the country, which was state-owned. So it was a commercial bank, but not a privately owned, a state-owned commercial bank, the only bank which provided retail banking services, the services to the general public for 40 years practically. And everything, the whole monetary system and monetary decisions were in the hands of the central bank and, shall I say, the Communist Party leadership and Moscow, eventually Moscow, because every important decision was made in Moscow or was dictated by Moscow. It's very important to understand this to know why the system worked as it worked and why that kind of system was set up and operated in Hungary. This meant first that apart from, as I said, inheriting a rather underdeveloped economy, the economic system and the economic policies introduced after World War II had nothing to do with the real workings of the economy. It was not, of course, not a market-based economy that was introduced. And there were very arbitrary decisions made and arbitrary economic policies decided. It was a planned, strictly planned economy. You know? There were people, a so-called central planning office, who decided, they made 5-year plans, you know, actually imitating the Soviet model. The Soviet model, in the Soviet Union, everything was planned in advance, you know. They decided, and they saw that they knew better what would happen in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and they saw that they knew better what the market wanted, how the market should operate, what the market was like, and what the people wanted and the economy needed. So, and it was an absolutely non-competitive environment, including the banking sector. As I said, there was one commercial bank, and that was state-owned, so we can't speak of any kind of competition. You know?
So was it one commercial bank with lots of branches in different
Yes,
cities?
that's right, exactly. So it had branches across the country, and in cities like Budapest or bigger cities, more than one branch, of course. So it depended always on the size of the town or village and the population. But you are right, there were branches, and it provided. So if you wanted to take out a loan, you had to turn to that bank. Okay? And of course, your creditworthiness was assessed, and if you were found creditworthy, you were extended a loan on which you had to pay interest, of course. So in this respect, this bank created money, but it was not the bank, but through the bank it was the government that created the money, because the money created by that commercial bank went to the state coffers, you know, because everything was in state hands. So it was not that the bank shareholders were pocketing the money, you know, there was no question about that, you know. So that was the way it created money, and that was the way it provided services, banking services, to the general public, the retail banking service, as it's called. At the top there was the the central bank, which was responsible for which carried out the functions which any central bank has to or is supposed to carry out. But apart from it, it had a very strict control on all the processes and all the various stages of the financial system, money flow, the monetary system, the monetary policies. Everything was in the hands of the government through the central bank, because the central bank actually was just a vehicle for the government. So it was not really an independent organization or institution. Even today there's a lot of talk, I'm sure you are aware of it, there's a lot of talk of whether central banks should be independent or not, and are they independent at all or not. Well, that's for sure that in Hungary during that period the central bank was anything but an independent institution. You know? As I already mentioned, there was no market. The economy was not based on market demand or market conditions. Everything was, all the important decisions were made by the Politburo, the top leadership of the Communist Party, and in Moscow. And in the late 40s, Moscow set up a Comecon, was the name, which was an economic organization for economic cooperation between the East European countries. You know? And it was Moscow which decided which country had to produce what, and which country had to export what to which other East European communist country. So, and of course, these products were sold not at market prices, you know, but at prices which were more or less fixed by Moscow. You know? What did it result in? Of course, it resulted in that first the quality was very poor quality, because there was no need, there was requirement, you know, to produce goods of high quality, because it was not competing on the world market, on Western market, on the world market. It was exported and it was bought by the other countries anyway, however poor quality those products were. You know? And also Hungary had to import, let's say Hungary exported buses, urban buses, to East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Soviet Union, whatever, and Hungary was importing shoes from East Germany, for example, you know, and fruit from Bulgaria, and vegetables from Bulgaria. Also Hungary was producing a lot of agricultural produce, but still that was the diktat of Moscow. And apart from quality being very poor, there was not enough quantities. It's a shortage economy, because the economy was not able to produce all the wealth or all the money it should have been able to produce, you know, to have enough money in the system. So there were shortages of practically everything, from food, as I said, it was an agricultural country, but from food to clothing and all other goods, there were shortages, especially in the 1950s, but even later in the 60s and 70s. You know? There were shortages because there was not enough there were not enough raw materials, there were not enough money. Hungary was absolutely short of, was strapped of foreign hard currencies, convertible currencies like the dollar or Deutsche Mark, and there was no money to buy the raw materials, the things that needed to produce enough goods in quantity, let alone in quality. And from the 1960s, and especially from the 70s on, Hungary started to borrow very heavily from Western banks, because being a bit more liberal than the other East European countries, from the 70s on, Hungary tried to build up closer ties with the Western countries, especially West Germany, which was near Austria, and even Britain and the States. But of course, these attempts were usually thwarted by Moscow, so there were futile attempts, but still there were a lot of attempts. First, in the late 60s, Hungary introduced economic reforms. It was a kind of halfway house, because the country tried to introduce certain market elements into the economy, but they were not real market economic elements, so it was a very mixed bag, and it couldn't work really effectively, you know, because you had the communist elements, the old system, all these elements, and you tried, I mean, the government tried to introduce some market elements. But even these attempts were stopped by Moscow after a few years, because they started to realize that the Hungarians were starting to live better than the Soviets, than the Romanians, than the other comrades in the bloc, you know, and Moscow frowned on it, and all these reform attempts were stopped after a few years. So we went back to square one in a way, you know, back to the drawing board. So it wasn't very successful, and the shortage economy was kept on, and no market conditions. And that's how Hungary started to borrow, because the leadership wanted to maintain a certain level of living standards for the population. On the one hand, on the other hand, to trade with Western countries, the country needed Western so-called convertible currencies, as I said, the dollar, Deutsche Mark. Otherwise, you know, this ruble, that was the Soviet currency, or Hungarian forints, the country's national currency, you weren't able to trade with Western countries. It was out of the question, so you needed, I mean, the country needed Western currency to trade. But it led to the country being heavily indebted in Japanese yen, in US dollars and other Western currencies. And it's still a drag on the economy today, you know, debt servicing, I mean, because huge amounts of money was borrowed from Western banks. How much, we still don't know, because these decisions, and this was another important element of the system, that the most important decisions were made behind the scenes. So it was the public, they were not made public, you know. You may have had sporadic information from the state media, but usually it was distorted information and only half of the story. So we didn't really know what was going on, and we still a bit in the dark what was going on. And this system was set up in the banking system until 1987. Hungary reintroduced a two-tier banking system in 1987, around that time, when foreign-owned banks could set up business in Hungary, you know. Austrian, German, Italian banks started to open either subsidiaries, set up subsidiaries in Hungary, or just branches, and that's the system now. But going back to the pre-1990 system or 1987 system, as I said, because everything was state-controlled, we cannot speak about real money creation in the sense that usually you are all talking about in the Western economies, the capitalist economies. It was completely different, because it was a kind of a halfway house in every respect, you know. Yes, some commercial bank activities, but still controlled by the state. Yes, you could take out a loan, banks credited to people. If you wanted to buy a new house or a flat, you could take out mortgage, you know, but for many families it was very difficult. They had difficulties repaying the loans. It's often thought of in the West that, oh, it was a socialist country, a communist country, so there was a social network, a welfare network. So obviously, it was impossible that people would have run into financial difficulties. That's not true, you know. You could have run, and many families, many households did run into financial difficulties if they wanted to buy a new home or anything else, and they wanted to take out a loan, or did take out a loan from that one single commercial bank.
How about if we take some questions and then maybe
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
jump
of
more
course.
to the present? Any questions from 1948 to 1990?
Yeah.
So what was the employment situation like at that time? Was it high or was
Yeah, it was absolutely high. Practically, there was full employment. There was hidden unemployment, by which I mean, I explained it to you that, for example, everybody had a job, you know, if you wanted to, unless you didn't want to have a job. But the situation was that, let's say there was a company with 500 employees, but maybe the company needed only 100 employees, okay? Which meant that there were 400 people who didn't, that was the hidden unemployment, who didn't really have work to do, you know. They were sitting, gossiping all day, drinking coffee, you know, really rasping their nails, whatever, you know. But they had to support the 100 people who did work at the company, you know. And everybody had to, so again, it was another drag on the economy, you know. So that salaries and wages were very low, even if you were a highly trained, highly educated professional, you know, with 2 or 3 university or college degrees. Even in that case, your salaries were low, and your wages were low, even if you were a skilled worker, a very good skilled worker, because it dragged on the whole system, you know.
Thank you for the presentation. And how about if we go forward? How if things improved in Hungary, or a little bit, or not much? Or from my understanding is that people are struggling there still today. This is 28 years later.
Yes, almost 30 years later, yes. So things have changed a lot, and they haven't changed a lot, so both. You know, I mean, for example, talking about first the monetary and banking system, now, of course, as I said, we have a 2-tier banking system, quite a few commercial banks, privately owned, some of them foreign owned, some of them Hungarian owned, but privately owned commercial banks operating in the country. Similarly as in other countries, you know, crediting, creating money through credit, you know, sometimes quite greedy, and often, you know, the profits were pocketed by the foreign owners, you know. But it's very interesting that the one commercial bank that we had before 1987, which was state-owned, is still in business. Now it's a privately owned shareholders company, shareholders bank, you know. But it's still it's the biggest commercial bank now in Hungary. You know?
Was everything privatized? From my understanding, when the Soviet Union broke up, we kind of insisted, the West did, that there was privatization. That there was privatization of basically everything they could get their hands on. Did the same thing happen in Hungary?
Yes, that's right. Very large-scale privatization followed 1990. Some of them were disastrous, you know, in other countries, but some were quite all right. The current situation is that the present government, it's a very right-wing government, and they want to renationalize everything. Not everything, but as many things as possible. For example, the public utility sector was privatized after 1990. I know that the general view is that the public utility sector should be kept in state hands, but anyway, even that sector was privatized after 1990, but now there is a renationalization process, for example, in the case of the public utility sector and some others. Of course, in education and healthcare, still state-run. There are private clinics, private schools, so there is private capital in those sectors as well, but it's mostly, sorry about that, it's state-run, but otherwise as the monetary, the banking system, the industry, trade, whatever, was privatized following 1990.
I was wondering, Mishi, was inflation more of a factor before the early 1990s or after that time instead?
Yes, that's a very, very interesting question because after World War II, for a very long time, seemingly there was no inflation in Hungary because prices were fixed by the state. So there was a price office, a state price office, and prices were fixed and hardly ever changed. Consumer prices have hardly ever changed, or if they changed very little for a very long time. And then in the late 70s, it's still well before the system changed or collapsed, the communist system, some reform-minded economists managed to convince the Communist Party leadership that the economy would collapse in no time if they went on keeping this system. So in late 70s, suddenly, there were huge price increases, and that was the end of fixed consumer retail prices in Hungary. At the time, it was a terrible stir among the public, in society, even unrest, because people were not used to changing prices, they were used to fixed prices. So that was the first time, that's when it started to change. And then from the late 70s on, inflation started to run amok, And even in the early 90s, after the political changes in the early 90s, at one point, that was 28% inflation in Hungary, which is terrible, But luckily, the country, by the mid-90s, or by the second half of the 1990s, managed to control, put it in control, but inflation was
Mishi, one thing I've always wondered is, you were saying before that there was a shortage of money sometimes. If the government was creating the money, why was there a shortage, or were they putting themselves into debt to create it? Was the government putting itself into debt to issue the money?
Yeah. Exactly. As I said, it's still a drag on the economy, so it has to be serviced.
Well, that's very interesting. I was also interested in your description of the guaranteed job. The guaranteed job that you had there. We have a group here in the United States now advocating for a job guarantee. I wonder what you thought of that system. It didn't sound like it worked very well in Hungary.
Yeah, but it's different because I understand in the US 4 or 5% is they say that full employment in the US, and the Fed says that there's full employment, it means that there is a 4% unemployment rate, am I right, or 5%?
Yeah. That's debatable.
Yeah, but in Hungary it was practically zero, because if you couldn't prove that you were, let's say, a housewife, there's a category, otherwise you could get arrested. You could get arrested for not being in employment, so it was compulsory to work, to be in employment, not a possibility, it was compulsory. So it was a criminal act, if you couldn't prove that you were a freelance artist or a freelance journalist, it's okay, but then it was written in your ID card that you were a freelance writer, a freelance journalist, or whatever, so you couldn't just walk on the street without get arrested any time. So it was completely different from what you expect.
Hi, my name is Jerry, and
Yeah.
You said that after World War II, that the country was primarily, their economy revolved around agriculture? And,
Yes.
Okay, and you were talking about a shortage of raw materials, so could you name the top raw materials that it needed, that it was short of?
Well, for the industry, first, energy, we could import oil and gas and whatever from the Soviet Union at non-market prices in exchange for a lot of agricultural produce and other produce going to the Soviets. But there are other raw materials that the industry, different sectors of the industry needed, from metal to, I don't know, iron and other, so all kinds of things. Hungary is very poor in natural resources, that's another factor. Hungary is very poor in natural resources, so a whole lot of things still has to be imported.
Okay. Also, so Hungary was part of the Soviet bloc that was formed
Yeah,
after the
right.
war. Who decided that Moscow was going to be in charge? How was that?
They did.
I tell you, I have to go back to the Yalta Agreement when the Western powers and the Soviet Union agreed with Stalin. Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin agreed that Eastern Europe would be liberated by the Soviet Union, by the Red Army, and that the world was divided by the great powers, so that's how it started. So.
It's an interesting question, though, too. Hungary was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and connected with Austria, Hungary was actually connected to Germany, historically a little more so. And then to switch over to have a Russian yoke was a little bit of a change.
Yes, but if we are talking about history, that because from the 1930s on, Hungary became more and more strongly allied to Nazi Germany, which is a shame, of course, so I'm not very proud of it. But because of this, and Hungary took part in the Second World War on the side of Germany, Nazi Germany's side, and that's where it was extremely heavily punished by the Soviets after the war. So it was part of the game that they took revenge on the country because of its role in the Second World War and also Hungary's role in the war against the Soviet Union when Germany occupied the Soviet Union in 1941. So it was part of it. So yes, and it was quite a change from one master to another. Changing masters, that's not happening.
What about today? In Poland and Bulgaria, in Croatia, there's positive money movements, or little monetary reform groups, and it's often one or two people in a country. And this is something that's just being nourished now in East European countries. What can the future look like for Hungary? And the question they're debating now, or in the last year or two, they're moving away from it because of the conservative or the fascist government in place now. They were debating a year ago whether they should take on the euro. They're part of the European Union, and there's an expectation after time to take on the euro, but they'd have to give up the florin, the local currency and local control, and the seigniorage for that. Yeah, that's where I was getting involved, or was lucky to meet some people. But what's the future like? And now that you're learning about monetary reform and us revolutionaries here, us Tavarishi,
yes.
How can we help you influence your work there?
If I can be a bit immodest, for the time being, it's a one-man show on my part, because I'm trying to, joking aside, I'm trying to make the first steps, and I'm building contacts with bankers or ex-bankers who are very good at their jobs, and who are seen that could and would be ready to help us with these things, like positive money or IMR, monetary reform. So I hope that, said joking, but at the same time quite seriously, that the first steps are being taken, and I'm absolutely confident that it will develop into something more.
Yeah. In response to a question earlier, you indicated that when Hungary was under communist control, that with a state-owned central bank and a state-owned bank, that new money was being created by the state, which sounds like sovereign money. But what I remember you said when you were talking to the coffee house was that during that period of time, there was borrowing occurring by Hungary from Western banks, and that the real increase in the money supply was coming from that lending from Western banks. Is that correct?
It's correct, yes. But of course that money was squandered in many ways, So it was okay for a time, for a certain time, that people could feel that they were living better than neighboring communist countries, But there's a price that you have to pay. Just like you had to pay for full employment. You always have a price. You can't maintain a system like that in the longer run. So this money went for supporting that system, until it no longer was able to support that system, and the system collapsed. Not only Hungary, and of course it had a lot to do with the changes in the Soviet Union, that after these young gentlemen died one after the other, these teenagers, then Gorbachev came to power and the whole system started to dismantle,
Thank you for this interesting talk. We've got to know each other already in Utrecht and talked to each other. Nice to meet you here again.
Thank you.
And my question or my stake would be, because you've seen a system where there's only basically the state involved in the current money system, in the money system you have, and we are proponing